Paul, Jennifer. Paul is the fundraiser for Howard Payne now, and if he comes to your house singing, you better tie up your wallet. Be money well spent, I can tell you that. Thank you. It's a beautiful job, beautiful job. Joe asked me before the service, what's the difference between a viola and a violin? And I told him the difference between a viola and a violin is both of them are beautiful women, but one sings alto and the other soprano. And that's kind of the difference, but just a beautiful, beautiful job. Jesus told some really interesting stories that often had some pretty shady characters as an illustration or an example to the church. I mean, we've seen several of them already. Can you imagine that you would ever maybe do a Sunday school lesson with children in which you might start off by telling the story of a guy who cheated on business deals, and somehow or another that was going to be an illustration of what it meant to be wise and shrewd in the kingdom of God, and yet Jesus did that. And then in this instance, he tells a story about a shady judge, a dishonest judge. What a story. Jesus wasn't afraid to do these kinds of things. On one occasion, he would say to his disciples, trying to remind us of how that we should live and something about the nature of God, he said, "And if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, for which of you, if your son asks for a piece of bread, would give him a stone? Or who of you, if someone of your children asked you for a fish, you'd give him a snake? But your Father in heaven knows far better how to give you good gifts. Will not your Father bless you with what is right?" And so in today's story, Luke, though somehow or another more than the other gospel writers, seem to be attracted to these kind of Jesus stories. And he weaves them into the telling of his gospel. Beautifully so, I might add. And here he comes. What a glorious word this is. There are some things this text does not teach, and we need to remind ourselves of that as we begin today. This text, for instance, does not teach us that God is like a dishonest judge. God doesn't go around with his hand out behind his back looking for a handout of some kind or a bribe. You don't have to bribe God to get justice. And this passage does not teach us that we have to badger God and beg Him and just wart Him to death in order to get Him to pay any attention to us. I'm sure none of your children ever did that. I certainly never did as a child, and they say we pay for our raising with our own children. I'm just trying to figure out why I should have to pay for Debbie's raising, you know? Because I never was that way as a child, but my kids could wart the warts off a frog, you know, just wanting things and begging for things, and they had funny ideas of justice. I remember one day I had gotten in the shower and forgot to get a wash rag, and I hollered out, "Todd, throw me a wash rag," and he tosses a wash rag up over the shower, and as he's leaving, I hear him say, "Now you got to buy me a Honda." Man, if I'd asked for a towel, I'd have been in for a Suburban and a boat, I suppose. Would have been the way it would have worked out on that. They could wart you to death. Constant nagging. And while we have a story here about a woman who gets no justice from a particular judge, if we're not careful, we begin to hear this story as if Jesus is saying, talk to God like this woman talked to that judge. But that's really not the point of the story either. This is a parable type of story. And Jesus is letting us know something about us, about God, about prayer, so that we might come to the place that we enter into a deeper, personal relationship with God. This text is teaching us, first of all, something about God Himself. Certainly not about God being dishonest or unjust, because we know for sure that is not the point of the text. In fact, in the words of the text that was read to us a few moments ago, it said, "Will not God bring about justice for His chosen ones?" Isn't it God's nature that He wants to bring what is right to His chosen ones, the ones He's picked, the ones He's given Himself for, the ones that are the objects of His love and of His devotion. It teaches us then some things about God. It teaches us that He is, by His very nature, a God of justice. We ask our earthly judges to limit themselves in their rulings about things to precisely what is expressed in the law of the land itself. Do their rulings uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Texas, of the United States of America? It's the only basis upon which they are to make rulings. Sometimes you and I might not like some of the rulings, and sometimes we all read and know about cases where a criminal maybe gets off because some point of law was not followed the way that it ought to be followed. When a trial is taking place, it's about more than just the guilt or innocence of the individual that's on trial. It's also a referendum upon each of the rights of every citizen of this country. And you and I want those rights to be protected for everyone. If they're not protected for everyone, they're not protected for anyone. And yeah, we hate to see someone who's guilty get off, but if the point of their conviction was illegally gained or was not followed by law. But that's still an external code. It's a code that exists outside of the judge himself. He's not allowed to bring in his own personal feelings, her own desires into the decision. It's got to be based solely upon the law itself. But when we're speaking about God as judge, there's not some external code to which God is required to conform to. For God Himself is justice, according to this text. He is the one who gives the codes. He is the one who speaks the law on Sinai. He is the one who gives the law to Moses. He is the one who interprets it to His people so that they have it. He is justice. And it comes out of His very heart and His very nature. And so God isn't simply saying you can go to Him knowing that He'll conform to those laws of Israel's past and He will live up to all the commandments and the codes. He will live up to something even deeper and more base than that. He is desperately in love with the people He judges. He is like a father to us. There was a goofy movie from a few years ago, had a great actor in it, Ryan O'Neal. Y'all are too young, most of you down here, to remember him. He was kind of a Tom Cruise of a different generation, maybe. Well, that's even old now, isn't it? Well, I better quit here. I'll get myself in trouble. But and then Barbara Streisand, who's known more as a singer, but the title of the movie was What's Up, Doc? Has one of the best chase scenes in it of any film ever, in which they're running through the streets of San Francisco. And like all good chase scenes in San Francisco, the cars have to wind up in San Francisco Bay. And they have to jump in there. I don't know if there's really a ramp somewhere in San Francisco that you can launch cars into the bay, but in movies there always is one. And they wind up in the bay and they fish them out, and you know they've smashed up cop cars and fire trucks, and they've driven through the prerequisite pane of glass that's being walked across the street back and forth, you know, as the cars are chasing through there. And they've driven through that, and they wind up in court, and you know they're in big trouble. And Barbara Streisand is hiding kind of in the background, and the judge is upset and getting all flustered by everyone trying to talk at once and what's going on. And he finally just points at someone and says, "You there, you speak up." And she raises her head, and you see this look of horror on the judge, and Barbara Streisand says, "Hello, Daddy." You know you're going to get a little different piece of justice if the judge is also your father.